In 21 days, White Cross Matchworks would be pulled down, and the poisoned rubble buried beyond town. The notice lay beneath Edwin Crewe's hand, as neatly as if he had composed the law himself. A kindness to the district, he told the directors assembled in the upper room of the Mechanics' Institute. Rain tapped the tall windows behind him. The building is unsound, the ground unprofitable, and its new owner unable to meet the charge of making it safe. Mabel Hartley remained standing at the end of the table because no chair had been offered. At 30, she had learned that men who called themselves practical preferred a woman to look either grateful or crushed. She gave them neither. Her black wool cuff was polished from use, and beneath one arm she held the japanned case that contained her scales, sample tubes, and brass spirit lamp. The case had belonged to her father, a druggist who had taught her to weigh a powder twice and trust a result only when it could be repeated. On the table beside Crewe lay a second document, his application for a patent covering a less poisonous, weather-resistant match. Its language was Mabel's. One ratio in it was also her mistake, the ratio she had crossed out 3 years earlier after a damp September ruined an entire trial batch. "Miss Hartley was employed to copy my observations," Crewe said when she named the theft. "Her present claim is the resentment of a failed assistant." The directors studied their gloves. Crewe owned the prosperous Calder Match Company, paid for the Institute's lectures, and supplied half the grocers between Leeds and York. Mabel possessed a dismissed woman's testimony and a provisional filing receipt that proved she had once submitted something, though not what it contained. Her notebooks had vanished from the Calder laboratory on the morning he discharged her. Mr. Selwyn Marr, the thin solicitor who had brought her the demolition notice, cleared his throat. "The matter before us is the White Cross property, not the patent. Under Mrs. Lavinia Hartley's will, her niece inherits the premises, together with the outstanding rates and the obligation imposed by the sanitary authority." A narrow smile touched Crewe's mouth. Lavinia, Mabel's aunt, had served 26 years as forewoman at White Cross before its closure. She had obtained the ruined works in a settlement no one understood, lived in 2 upstairs rooms until illness carried her to an infirmary, and left Mabel a building everyone called a grave with a chimney. Crewe pushed a folded offer along the table. £5 for the land. I will assume the demolition cost. You may leave Yorkshire with something more useful than pride. £5 would buy Mabel food and a modest room for several months. It would not restore her reputation, recover her process, or explain why Crewe had arranged to purchase a worthless factory before probate was complete. She put her fingertips on the offer, then moved it back to him. "I accept my aunt's bequest." Someone exhaled in pity. Crewe gathered the paper without hurry. "Then I hope you enjoy your 3 weeks." The rain had thickened by the time Mabel reached White Cross. The abandoned factory stood beside a black canal at the eastern edge of town, 4 long ranges of soot-dark brick around a yard where dock and nettles rose through cracked sets. Half the north roof had fallen. Rows of high windows had been blinded with boards, and the square chimney leaned just enough to make looking at it uncomfortable. Over the gate, the painted word White Cross survived only as pale scars. 2 labourers were unloading lime from a cart inside the yard. Mabel stopped beneath the gate arch. "Who engaged you?" The older man rested his shovel. "Mr. Crewe, sanitary work. We're to coat the dipping room wall before the place comes down. Mr. Crewe does not own this property." He said the order was settled. Fresh white plaster shone through a broken doorway at the rear of the yard. Mabel crossed the wet stones, unlocked the japanned case, and drew out a narrow steel spatula. The new coating was still soft. Beneath it lay older limewash, grey with years of smoke. Rain had blown through the roof and darkened a patch close to the floor. Within that dampness, fine brown strokes had surfaced. 3 letters, then a row of figures, then a sign like a circle cut by a short line. Not cracks, not mildew, writing. The labourer stepped after her. "Best not touch it, miss. Bad stuff was used in these works." Mabel held the spatula near the wall without scraping. A faint garlic-like taint lingered where the fresh plaster sealed the old surface, though the factory had stood idle for 13 years. She knew enough of phosphorus poisoning to fear dust more than stains. She closed the door, pocketed the key, and faced the men. "Take the unopened lime back. You may tell Mr. Crewe the owner refused entry." The younger labourer looked relieved. The older one frowned toward the written notice nailed at the gate. 21 days won't make you mistress of much." "It makes me mistress of this door today." After they left, Mabel returned to the rain-darkened patch. As the water spread through the old lime, another name rose below the first, faint as breath on glass. Dinah Moore, 6.478. Mabel had expected rot, debt, and perhaps one final example of Lavinia's stubbornness. She had not expected the walls to remember women the company's books had forgotten. She spent her first night in the former pay office because it was the only room with an intact ceiling and a door that barred. The grate smoked, the pump in the yard yielded rust-colored water, and every blanket smelled of damp wool. Before lighting a fire, she tested ash from the chimney and found it ordinary enough. Before sweeping, she tied a wet cloth over her mouth and brushed only the office floor, where no match composition had been mixed. The dangerous rooms she marked with chalk crosses on their outer doors. At dawn she counted her resources. £4 11 shillings after the journey, 2 loaves, tea, a heel of cheese, her chemical case, Lavinia's ring of keys, and the clothing bundled in a carpet bag. The demolition charge, if imposed upon her, would exceed everything she might earn in a year. The factory plan in the office named a cutting room, splint loft, dipping room, drying chamber, packing hall, stores, and a small laboratory. Its penciled additions were in Lavinia's hand. Beside 3 rooms, she had drawn a square divided into 9 smaller squares. Mabel first took it for a window, then noticed the same figure incised on a glazed ceramic tile kept in the desk drawer. Each square bore a different wash of dull cream or grey. Boots sounded in the yard before she could examine it. The woman who entered was broad-shouldered and perhaps 42, with a wool shawl drawn high around her face. One side of her jaw had collapsed inward, giving her sternness an uneven shape. A thin girl waited behind her with a covered basket. "You're Lavinia's niece," the woman said. "Dinah Moore. That is my Polly. We came for what your aunt promised." Mabel thought of the name in the damp wall. What did she promise? That white cross would answer for us. Dinah's gaze moved to the neat columns Mabel had copied from the plan. Suspicion hardened it. "You have her keys and his manners. Are you selling to Crewe?" "No." "Then you'll lose it to the authority. Same end, less money." Mabel showed her the demolition notice. Dinah could read. Her lips tightened at the date. When Mabel mentioned the names beneath the lime, the woman went still. "Did Lavinia write them?" "Some markings may be older. I cannot expose them safely until I know what was used." Dinah gave a short, bitter laugh. "That is how gentlemen always begin. Safely, properly, later. Then another girl loses her teeth while they make a committee." She turned to go. Polly, no more than 14, glanced back at the ceramic tile in Mabel's hand. "Ma'am has one of those," she said. Dinah caught her wrist. "Enough. Please." Mabel kept her voice level. "If it came from this factory, it may tell me how the wall was prepared. And what do we receive for telling you?" It was the right question, and Mabel was ashamed she had not asked it herself. "A written promise that anything recovered concerning the workers will be copied for them, not kept as my private property, and no name will be published without consent. Mr. Marr can witness it." Dinah studied her a long while. "Bring the paper tomorrow, then I may bring the tile." When she had gone, Mabel tested scrapings already loose from the pay office sill. The oldest coating contained lime and chalk. Later layers had casein, soot, and traces of iron. One washed square on Lavinia's tile, darkened when held near vinegar vapor, another when dampened, a third when warmed. It was not a cipher in the romantic sense. It was a set of reference reactions made by someone who understood that different compounds survived differently beneath lime. At noon, a man named Caleb Dunn arrived with a carpenter's rule, a tinsmith's scar across one thumb, and a message from Dinah. He had repaired White Cross drying racks as a boy. He would inspect the roof for 2 shillings, provided Mabel did not ask him to enter the dipping room. "I would stop you if you tried," she said. That earned the first hint of a smile. Together they claimed a narrow portion of the front range. Caleb braced the pay office ceiling, replaced 2 broken panes with oiled cloth, and fitted a sheet metal cowl that improved the chimney drawer. Mabel sealed the cracks beneath doors leading to production rooms with damp sacking. They opened high windows from outside, using a hooked pole so any settled dust would not fall upon them. By dusk, the office was no warmer, but it was habitable. The following morning, Dinah returned with the tile wrapped in an old apron, and Mr. Marr followed, carrying Mabel's written pledge. Dinah made the solicitor read every sentence aloud before she signed with a careful D. Her tile resembled Lavinia's, except that numbers had been scratched on its back. 2, 7, 11, 19. They corresponded to layers in a narrow test strip beside the dipping room threshold. Mabel worked from the doorway. She misted a hand-sized section with clean water, held a square of white cloth below it, and waited. Brown characters appeared, then faded as the surface dried. A weak infusion of oak gall brought a second set into view without disturbing the lime. She recorded every mark, washed the cloth separately, and sealed it in a jar. "E. Voss," Polly read over her shoulder. "Shift 11. Dinah corrected her. "F.E. Voss." She packed long boxes, never dipped. Beside the name stood a circle with a stroke. Dinah touched the hollow in her own cheek. That meant jaw trouble. The factory's surviving wage book listed no F.E. Voss, nor did it list Dinah. Mabel turned pages twice, then a third time, unwilling to accept the absence. "Men's names," Dinah said. "Boys in cutting, foreman. The women were counted by trays. If one went ill, another hand filled her place, and the trays remained the same." Rain ticked through the broken roof. Across one small square of wall, Mabel had revealed 7 women erased from the company's official memory. Caleb entered with a plank under his arm. "You have a visitor." Crew stood in the yard beneath a black umbrella, his boots untouched by mud, because one of his clerks had laid boards from the gate. He looked at the sealed doors, the braced office, and the copy of the worker pledge drying beside the stove. "Industry," he said. "How admirable. I have increased my offer to £10. Why did you order the wall plastered?" "To bind contaminated dust. Your own precautions demonstrate the necessity." "Then why only the oldest wall?" His glance rested on the damp test square for less than a second. It was enough. "Because that wall is most unsound. Accept the money, Mabel. Your aunt mistook grievance for evidence, and you are making the same error." He left the revised offer on a barrel. After his carriage departed, Mabel turned it over. The paper bore the watermark of Calder Match Company, and along its lower edge was a dusting of the same fresh lime the labourers had applied. Crew had not merely ordered the work, he had been inside the dipping room before sending them. Over the next 4 days, White Cross ceased to be a single ruin and became a set of problems that could be measured. Caleb marked unsafe roof bays in red chalk. Mabel drew a route that allowed them to reach the threshold without crossing contaminated floors. Dinah brought 3 former workers, each skeptical in a different fashion. Sarah Pike remembered shift numbers. Agnes Rill knew which foreman used triangles for deductions. Old Mercy Webb had lost her sight, but could identify the cadence of names when Polly read them aloud. Mabel paid them sixpence each from money she could not spare. "You are consultants," she said, when Agnes protested. "Memory is work." The markings did not form a simple list. They occupied successive coats of lime, so one year lay literally over another. Moisture revealed iron-based strokes. Oak gall darkened other writing. Gentle warmth from a shielded lamp showed wax-resisted signs. Mabel never treated more than a small panel at once. She copied positions on gridded paper and matched the reactions to Lavinia's ceramic tiles. The first pattern she understood was a count of sickness. A circle with a stroke marked pain or swelling of the jaw. 2 short strokes meant repeated absence. A triangle beside a weekly date corresponded to a penny withheld from pay. "Benefit club," Dinah said. "Cru's father told us the penny would help any girl too ill to stand. None of us ever saw more than a parcel of broth." The surviving company book recorded deductions only as general expenses. Over 11 years, the triangles on the wall suggested hundreds of women had paid. The second pattern was chemical. Between groups of names appeared compact notations for temperature, drying time, and ventilation. They resembled Lavinia's hand, but used terms Mabel had learned from her own experiments: binder, oxidizer, moisture, striking face. On one layer, dated 1878, a ratio matched the erroneous figure in Cru's patent application. Mabel's pulse quickened, then settled. A resemblance was not proof. The wall might have been marked later. The date might refer to a shift, not a year. Cru's lawyers would call every stroke an invention made after she inherited the works. "Why put a formula among names?" Caleb asked. Mabel looked from the circles of illness to the ventilation figures. Perhaps they are not separate records. Perhaps Lavinia was trying to show what happened when the process changed. On the 7th morning, a handbill appeared on the gate. It warned residents that Miss Hartley was disturbing poisonous deposits and endangering the canal. By noon, mothers were pulling children away from the lane. A grocer refused Mabel credit. The sanitary authority sent notice that an inspection would be made in 3 days. Cru's public mask was concern, and it was effective because the danger was real. Mabel gathered Dinah, Caleb and the others in the pay office. "We stop all wall work until the inspector comes. We show him our barriers, samples and route. If he requires changes, we make them." Agnes struck the table with her palm. "And lose 3 more days? If we poison one person while recovering the names, Cru will be right about the result, even if he lied about the cause." Dinah watched her, jaw drawn tight. Then she nodded. Lavinia said much the same. "We hated her for it some days." That evening, while Mabel was checking sealed jars in the old laboratory, a draft moved the flame of her lamp toward a wall with no window. She held still. The factory plan showed the drying chamber on the other side, its door nailed shut after a beam fell. Yet the air carried neither damp nor the sharp residue of the dipping room. It smelled faintly of metal and cold brick. Caleb measured the outer passage, then the room. "A ventilation duct," he said, "large one." At shoulder height, beneath flaking paint, they found the outline of a sheet iron panel. Its hinges faced outward and were not concealed. This was no secret chamber. It was an abandoned service access, sealed when the machinery stopped. Mabel fitted the smallest key on Lavinia's ring. The lock turned. The panel opened 4 inches and stopped against fallen brick. Caleb wedged it while Mabel directed lamplight through the gap. Beyond lay the upper end of a broad galvanized duct, its interior divided by angled baffles. A belt wheel showed behind it, green with corrosion. Nothing about the space was hidden. It was machinery, plainly built and deliberately abandoned. "Your aunt had me bend those baffles," Caleb said. "I was 16. She told the manager they would pull fumes away from the dipping tables. He called it an expensive chimney. Did it work? Better than nothing, until they removed the drive belt to run another cutting machine." Mabel did not reach inside. Dust lay thick upon the lower surfaces, and the danger of phosphorus residue was greatest where the air system had collected it. She sketched what she could see and closed the panel. The discovery enlarged the question rather than answering it. Lavinia had linked ventilation trials to the wall record, but the settings on the duct's adjustment plate had been filed away. The factory inspector, Arthur Copley, arrived on the 10th morning with Dr. James Fenner and a clerk from the Sanitary Authority. Copley was a compact man whose grey whiskers seemed trimmed to the dimensions of official forms. Fenner had treated workers from both White Cross and Calder. He greeted Dinah with discomfort, which she returned without courtesy. Crew joined them uninvited. Mabel led the party only through the secured front range and stopped them before the production passage. She showed her map of contaminated zones, the damp barriers, the high window ventilation, the jars labeled by room and date, and the tiny areas of wall she had tested. She did not claim that the precautions made the building safe. She asked what more was required. Copley inspected the seals. No dry scraping, no unprotected removal, no heating of deposits. Restrict entry to named persons. Agreed. Crew tapped the wall copies with one gloved finger. She has encouraged sick women to invent marks that support a grievance. Mabel set Lavinia's 2 reference tiles beside her own notes. The oldest reactive layers are below later coats, whose dates can be compared with repairs shown in the rate survey. Some writing contains iron gall, some was made with a wax resist, some with a copper-bearing wash. I can demonstrate the sequence without exposing the whole surface. She took a loose flake from a crack already detached in the pay office, not the dipping room, and placed it edgewise beneath a magnifying lens. The coats formed narrow bands, smoke-darkened cream, white, grey, white again. She moistened only the underside. A brown stroke appeared in the 3rd layer and remained covered by the 2 above it. "It cannot have been written last week," she said. "But I cannot yet prove who wrote it or what every sign means." Dr. Fenner bent reluctantly to the lens. "And the circles. Dinah believes they record jaw illness. I intend to compare names and dates against parish burials, infirmary admissions, and any medical accounts that survive." Dinah unfastened her shawl. The scar below her left ear descended farther than Mabel had seen. "You treated me in '78, doctor. The bill went to White Cross, though the company said I had toothache." Fenner's face altered. "I remember the operation. I do not remember the account." "Then find it." Crew objected that old suffering did not make an unsafe building sound. Copley agreed on the narrow point. He gave Mabel 7 days to submit a containment plan for demolition or stabilization. Yet he also ordered that no wall coating be removed or covered before his return. Crew's attempt to bury the markings had bought Mabel a temporary protection. Outside, the industrialist paused by her work table. "You are mistaking delay for victory. And you are mistaking a patent application for an invention." His composure tightened. "Your receipt contains no specification. Your notes are gone. Even if you persuaded those women to repeat your story, none was present in my laboratory." He knew precisely which proof she lacked. After he left, Mabel wrote to the patent office for a certified copy of her provisional submission and to the Sheffield supplier from whom she had purchased red phosphorus for experiments under her own name. The replies could not arrive before demolition day. Mr. Marr warned that even when they came, Crew might obtain an injunction or prolong the dispute until she starved. "Then we need evidence that does not depend on speed," Mabel said. They turned to the sealed dipping room. Copley permitted access only after Caleb fitted a temporary hood to the service duct and powered its fan from the yard with a treadle and belt. Mabel, Caleb and Copley wore layered cloth masks kept damp, oilskin covers and gloves. Dinah stayed outside by agreement, furious but sensible. The room was not dramatic. 4 low tables stood beneath grey dust. A cracked mixing drum occupied the far corner. Racks sagged under the remains of empty frames. The walls were obscured by lime, except for a grid of pencil-sized apertures Lavinia had bored through selected coats, perhaps to compare them. On the drum, Mabel found adjustments numbered 2, 7, 11 and 19, the figures on Dinah's tile. When Caleb engaged the fan, ribbons tied to the duct shifted at different strengths as he moved the drum lever. Lavinia's ceramic squares were not merely chemical samples. They recorded ventilation settings paired with wall layers. Inside an unlocked metal cabinet stood 16 more tiles and a set of shallow earthenware trays. No notebooks, no patent drawings, no convenient confession. Each tile had been fired after receiving a sample of factory lime, preserving a dated chemical reference that ordinary damp and whitewashing could not erase. Mabel arranged them by number in the yard. Their discoloration corresponded to the periods of weakest ventilation. The wall's circles increased on those same layers. When the fan had been disabled entirely, the count of sickness marks nearly doubled. The last tile carried Mabel's own initials. She remembered making it at Lavinia's kitchen table in 1885, when she was 27 and still employed by Crew. She had demonstrated a safer mixture whose active phosphorus was kept on the striking surface rather than in the match head. Lavinia had asked for a sample, saying only that Whitecross had once punished girls for the chemistry their owners chose. Mabel had assumed the tile was a keepsake. On its back, Lavinia had scratched a date and the words, "First wet autumn, failure." That was the origin of the erroneous ratio. Crew could have copied it only from the early notebook he denied taking, or from this tile after visiting Whitecross. Yet the tile alone could be dismissed as Mabel's recent work. She needed an independent date. Dinah supplied the first link. She remembered Lavinia carrying the tile to a meeting of the Whitecross Workers' Benefit Club at the Methodist schoolroom. Agnes remembered signing a receipt for the room. Mercy recalled a lecture Mabel had given that evening about safer matches because Lavinia had repeated the phrase, "fire without a poisoned mouth," for weeks. Mr. Marr found the schoolroom rental entry in a chapel account book, October 14th, 1885. It proved Mabel had discussed a process then, but not its exact formula. "Proof rarely arrives as one shining object," he told Polly, who looked disappointed. "It comes as a queue of plain people, each carrying one honest piece." They still had 12 days. Caleb priced the minimum stabilization required to keep the front and east ranges standing through winter. Timber shores, slate removal, drainage, fencing, and a guarded enclosure for contaminated rubble would cost at least £38. The western range and chimney would require far more. Mabel could neither repair everything nor pretend she could. Crew offered £25 the following day. At the same time, a bank manager sent Mr. Marr notice that an old Whitecross Benefit Club account existed, but would not be released without lawful trustees and supporting membership records. The balance was not named. The listed trustees were Lavinia and 2 women now dead. The triangles on the wall might prove contributions, but only if the worker census survived and could be authenticated. Mabel saw Crew's purpose at last. He wanted more than the land. If the benefit account were declared abandoned, someone might seek to absorb it into the defunct company's assets. Calder Match Company had purchased Whitecross machinery and certain obligations at liquidation. Crew could claim the fund, destroy the worker's record, and silence the patent challenge in one demolition. On the 13th night, rain swelled the canal until water lapped over the lower quay. A boy hammered on the gate after midnight. He said milky water was flowing from the factory drain toward 3 cottages downstream. Mabel followed him with a lantern. The runoff carried a sharp smell and pale sediment. A section of the old settling pit had collapsed under the rain, exposing refuse from the dipping room. If it reached the cottages' wells, children could be harmed. Caleb said they could block the drain with clay, but the flooded pit would force water back through the factory. The safer course was a lined trench into an empty brick basin on Whitecross ground, with straw and charcoal filters that could be removed under Copley's direction. It would cost nearly all Mabel had left, including the money reserved for Mr. Marr's patent search. Dinah stood in the rain beside her. "Crew will say this proves you cannot manage the place." "It may prove exactly that. If you spend the money, you may lose your filing." The cottage's lamps glimmered beyond the black water. Mabel thought of Crew's copied words, of the years she had worked after midnight while he signed orders and called them his discoveries. Then she thought of the circles on the wall. A safer formula that existed only to vindicate its inventor was not safe enough. "Wake the cottagers," she said. "Tell them not to draw from the wells. Caleb, we build the trench." They worked until noon. Mabel paid for clay, 2 tarred sheets, charcoal, and a cartload of clean straw. Caleb summoned 3 men who trusted him. Dinah and Agnes filled sacks, while Polly carried messages to Copley and Dr. Fenner. Mabel directed the channel across the highest part of the yard, testing the water at each stage and keeping everyone away from the sediment. Crew arrived at 10 with a photographer and 2 members of the sanitary committee. He posed beneath an umbrella beside the damaged pit. "Miss Hartley's disturbance of the premises has produced the very hazard we anticipated," he announced. Mabel's hands were black with charcoal. "The collapse began outside every area we examined. The drain cap was broken from above." An accusation, an observation. The iron bears fresh hammer marks. The photographer lowered his camera long enough to look. Copley came an hour later, inspected the channel, and ordered the temporary basin maintained. He would not say the drain had been sabotaged. He did say Mabel's response had prevented contaminated water from reaching the cottages. That distinction cost her almost everything and gained her no extension. By evening, Dinah placed a leather purse on the pay office table. It contained 7 shillings and 9 pence gathered from former Whitecross women. "For the patent search," she said. Mabel pushed it back. "You were owed benefits. I will not take more from you." "It is not charity. It is a subscription to the truth." "Write our names and the amount." Mabel did. For the first time, the women of Whitecross saw their contributions entered in a book they were allowed to read. The next 3 days brought progress in inches. Dr. Fenner found 6 old treatment accounts, mislabeled as dental extractions. Parish burial registers supplied 4 names and ages that matched wall entries absent from the wage book. A paper merchant in Bradford confirmed selling chemically sized copying sheets to Lavinia. Caleb found bolt holes showing that the service duct had once connected to hoods over every dipping table. Mabel reconstructed the sequence. Lavinia and the workers had marked each woman, shift, symptom, and penny deduction in reactive washes. When management ordered the walls whitened, the record disappeared safely beneath the new coat. Lavinia then sampled each layer onto a numbered ceramic tile before the next whitewashing. The wall preserved the census. The tiles dated its chemistry. The ventilation settings connected exposure to illness. Yet the earliest wall, the one Crew had tried to cover, held the years before the Benefit Club was formally registered. Without it, dozens of contributors could still be excluded. At dusk on the 16th day, Mabel noticed white flakes on Polly's boots. "Where have you been?" The girl looked toward Dinah and burst into tears. A labourer had offered her a shilling to leave the side gate unlatched after delivering coal. She had refused, but she had followed him and seen men unloading scaffolding behind the western wall. Mabel ran across the yard. The side gate stood open, its chain cut. 4 labourers in masks were already inside the dipping room, beneath a paper authorising emergency decontamination. They had driven chisels beneath the oldest lime and were stripping it from the bricks in broad sheets. Fresh plaster would have concealed the record. This would destroy it. Mabel shouted for them to stop. The foreman held up the authorization, signed by the chairman of the sanitary committee. Crewe had described the loosened coating as an immediate poison hazard and obtained an order while Copley was inspecting another district. "You are releasing the very dust you claim to contain," Mabel said. The men hesitated, but the foreman pointed to the seal. "Official paper." A chisel struck brick, a sheet of lime shattered on the floor. Dinah pushed past the doorway before Mabel could catch her. She saw names breaking beneath the men's boots and bent to gather the fragments. One laborer swung a sack of debris aside, its bottom split. Grey dust rose around Dinah's uncovered face. Mabel dragged her backward by the shoulders, covered her mouth with a wet cloth, and ordered everyone out. Caleb stopped the treadle fan before it could draw the cloud through the duct. Mabel shut the door and sealed its gap from the clean side, while Dinah coughed in the yard. Dr. Fenner was summoned. He washed Dinah's face and hands, examined her breathing, and insisted she be taken home. The exposure might cause no lasting harm, he said, but with her damaged jaw and lungs, he would not gamble. Dinah caught Mabel's sleeve. "The pieces." "Stay still. They have our names." Mabel looked through the doorway window at the broken floor. Fragments could be lifted only by trained men under controlled conditions. If she rushed in to rescue them, she would turn proof of Crewe's misconduct into proof of her own. "We will recover what can be recovered," she said, "but not by sacrificing another woman to that room." Crewe arrived after dark and stood outside the gate while his solicitor served an injunction forbidding Mabel to interfere with authorized decontamination. His expression remained grave, almost sympathetic. "You encouraged Mrs. Moore to enter a poisoned chamber," he told the constable who accompanied him. Polly flew at him, but Caleb held her. Mabel spoke before anger could ruin them. "Mrs. Moore entered because your men began unprotected demolition while the extraction fan was running. Inspector Copley will find the wall broken, the authorization timed after your work began, and 4 witnesses to the dust release." Crewe's eyes narrowed. He had expected panic, not a sequence of facts. The injunction gave his men control of the dipping room until a magistrate reviewed the order. Mabel retained the pay office and yard, but the copied wall charts, 3 sample jars, and her metal straightedge had disappeared from the laboratory. The cabinet of ceramic tiles was empty. Caleb found cart tracks at the side gate. Agnes blamed Polly for trusting the laborer enough to follow him. Polly ran away crying. Dinah lay feverish at home. Copley sent word that he could return only the next afternoon. For 1 hour, Mabel sat alone beside the cold stove and believed Crewe had won. The oldest surface was broken. The tiles were stolen. Her money was gone. 6 days remained. The provisional filing copy was still somewhere between London and Yorkshire, and no court would preserve a factory merely because its owner insisted that vanished evidence had once existed. She opened the contribution book Dinah had forced her to keep. The names were in different hands because Mabel had asked every literate woman to sign for herself. Beside Dinah's name stood 7 shillings and 9pence, then the names of the others, who had each supplied a few coins. Plain people, each carrying 1 honest piece. Mabel lifted the grate to bank the fire and saw a square of cream glaze beneath the coal bucket. It was not one of Lavinia's tiles. It was a blank Caleb had found in the laboratory and Polly had used as a rest for the kettle. A crescent of soot marked its face. Reference did not require possession of the original surface. It required a preserved comparison, recorded procedure, and an independent chain of custody. Mabel had kept duplicates. Whenever she tested a wall square, she had pressed a damp strip of inert paper to its lower edge, sealed the strip in a numbered jar, and copied the location into Mr. Marr's daily witness book. She had done it to monitor residue, not to preserve writing. Some papers held only dust. Others had taken faint reverse traces of the reactive strokes. The 3 missing jars mattered, but 27 remained locked in the pay office chest. She also remembered the cloth placed under the first damp test. It had been washed, sealed, and dismissed as a precaution. Under angled lamplight, Tiny brown marks appeared along its fibers, a transferred fragment of Dinah's name and date. By midnight, Mabel, Caleb, Agnes, Mercy, Polly, and Mr. Marr had assembled every surviving source. Polly returned without being fetched and gave a complete statement about the side gate and scaffolding. Caleb signed the times at which he started and stopped the fan. Agnes compared wall charts she had copied into her own sewing notebook, an act Mabel had not known about. Mercy recited the order of 11 names from memory, then demanded that Polly read them back until the sequence was exact. "Crew took the tiles," Polly said. "How do we prove what was on them?" Mabel picked up the blank tile. "We do not prove it with one object. We reproduce the reactions from the samples, then ask who had reason to steal the originals." At dawn, Copley sealed the dipping room and suspended Crew's decontamination order. He reprimanded Mabel for allowing Dinah near the threshold, and she accepted it. He then inspected the shattered lime, the cut chain, the hammer marks at the drain, and the laborers' masks. 2 men admitted they had begun work before the authorization was delivered. The foreman refused to say who ordered the tiles removed. Dr. Fenner reported that Dinah was breathing normally but must rest. His anger, when controlled, proved more useful than outrage. He produced the 6 medical accounts and a memorandum he had sent White Cross management in 1879, warning that jaw disease among matchworkers was not ordinary tooth decay. The company had returned it without reply. Crew's father had been a junior partner then. Edwin had later acquired the White Cross papers. The certified patent office copy arrived that afternoon. Mabel opened it before Mr. Marr, Copley, and 2 workers. Her provisional specification, filed 18 months earlier, described a match head free of white phosphorus, a treated striking surface, controlled drying, and continuous removal of fumes and dust. It did not include her final proportions. Provisional filings seldom contained every refinement. But it established her concept and date before Crew's application. An invoice from the Sheffield supplier arrived with it. The company had sold small quantities of red phosphorus and prepared binders to Miss Mabel Hartley at Calder's laboratory, charged to her personal account. A second letter stated that Crew had written 3 months later asking what she had purchased. Still, the strongest proof of copying came from Crew himself. His patent repeated the wet-autumn ratio from Mabel's failed 1885 tile. During later trials, she had reduced that proportion and altered the binder. The obsolete figure could not produce the weather resistance Crew claimed. If he demonstrated his application as written, it would fail. If he used the corrected process, he would reveal knowledge absent from his filing and traceable to Mabel's later experiments. "Can you make the safer version again?" Copley asked. "On a laboratory scale, with proper barriers and no unprotected workers. I will not produce saleable matches in this ruin." The answer disappointed the committee and impressed the inspector. Mr. Marr secured a hearing at the Mechanics' Institute for the 20th day, combining the sanitary review with sworn statements relevant to the patent opposition and benefit trust. The bank agreed to send a clerk with its oldest account book. Crew requested that the meeting be private. Copley insisted that affected workers be admitted. Before the hearing, Mabel went to Dinah's cottage. Dinah sat by the window with a hot cloth against her jaw. She was furious that Mabel had excluded her from the overnight work, then more furious when she learned how close they were to reconstructing the record. "I should be there," she said, "only if Fenner permits it, and not because we need to display your injury. Your evidence is your work, your payments, and what you know." Dinah lowered the cloth. "Gentlemen have displayed this face whenever it suited them. Charity dinners, medical lectures. Never once did they ask about the 14-hour shifts. Then tell the hearing what they omitted." They spoke plainly about Mabel's mistake. She had been so intent upon the wall that she had not guarded the former workers from the danger it contained. Dinah had entered by her own will, but Mabel had allowed urgency to become familiarity with risk. She wrote a rule that no future investigation would proceed without a worker-elected safety representative. Dinah agreed to serve, provided the rule bound Mabel as firmly as anyone else. The hearing filled the institute room beyond its chairs. Former White Cross women stood along the back wall. Calder employees came quietly, risking dismissal. Crew occupied the same place at the table where he had announced Mabel's failure 20 days earlier. Beside him sat his patent agent and the chairman who had signed the decontamination order. Mabel brought no theatrical revelation. She arranged ordinary things: the certified filing copy, purchase invoices, wall diagrams, sealed samples, 2 blank tiles, chapel accounts, medical bills, the contribution book, and a small shielded apparatus Caleb had built to her drawings. Crew's agent attacked each piece separately. The wall copies might be false, the memories might be mistaken, the chemical traces might be contaminated, the provisional specification might be vague, the supplier might simply have sold materials for Crew's work. The benefit triangles might mean anything. Mabel did not pretend otherwise. Any one item could be doubted, she said. The question is whether all of them, obtained from independent hands, produce the same dates and sequence. She began with the walls. Under Copley's supervision, a mason had recovered several intact fragments after sealing the room. Mabel showed their layered edges beneath magnification. Writing in a lower coat was physically older than the coats above. Chapel accounts dated meetings where Lavinia presented ceramic samples. Rate surveys dated repairs and whitewash orders. Former workers matched names to shifts without being shown one another's statements. Dr. Fenner's bills matched 6 symptom circles within the same weeks. Then came the triangles. The bank clerk opened a leather volume. Weekly deposits to the White Cross Benefit Club corresponded, within a few pence, to the number of triangle marks Mabel had recorded. The account held £286, 14 shillings, and 3p, money accumulated from workers' deductions and modest interest. It was not Mabel's fortune. Under the club rules preserved at the bank, it belonged to contributors and their dependents. The room stirred. Crew's solicitor rose to say Calder had assumed White Cross liabilities. "Not this one," the clerk replied. "Mr. Edwin Crew applied last month to have the dormant balance transferred as successor to the company. The bank declined for want of membership records." Crew had known the wall's value before Mabel did. Mabel moved to the process evidence. She described no dangerous recipe, only the principles: separating the safer reactive material from the match head, controlling moisture, reducing dust, and carrying vapors away from workers. She demonstrated with inert colored powders how Caleb's baffles drew material toward a closed collector rather than across the operator's face. Copley confirmed that the old White Cross bolt holes matched the apparatus in her drawing. Finally, she placed Crew's filed ratio beside Lavinia's 1885 note and her own corrected laboratory record reconstructed from supplier dates and sealed trial samples. "Mr. Crew claims his stated composition resists damp," she said. "I say the figure he filed was copied from my failed September trial. There is a simple test. Let his chemist prepare the process exactly as patented and submit it to humid air. I will prepare mine under the same controls." Crew had brought finished matches for a triumphant demonstration. His agent whispered to him. If he refused, the claim would look hollow. If he agreed, the copied error would expose him. "Laboratory variations prove nothing," Crew said. "Then your patent proves nothing," Mabel replied. Copley ordered both samples placed in closed humidity boxes away from flame. After an hour, the heads made to Crew's filed proportions softened and separated from their splints. Mabel's remained intact. The inspector then asked Crew's chemist whether the company's sales samples used the filed formula. The young man looked at Crew, then at the workers lining the wall. "No, sir. Mr. Crew gave me a corrected sheet after filing." "Whose handwriting?" "Miss Hartley's." Crew stood so abruptly his chair fell backward. In reaching to seize the sheet, he knocked over his document case. 6 of Lavinia's numbered tiles slid across the floor. No one mistook silence for uncertainty after that. The consequences did not arrive as applause. They came in minutes, orders, and signatures. Copley seized the tiles as evidence and referred the unauthorized removal and unsafe stripping to the factory inspectorate. The sanitary committee withdrew Crewe's demolition authority and censured its chairman for signing without an inspection. The patent agent notified the room that Crewe's application would be stayed pending formal opposition. Mr. Marr obtained a sworn undertaking that Calder would not manufacture from Mabel's corrected process or dismiss the chemist who had testified. Crewe himself was not ruined in an afternoon. He remained wealthy, angry, and represented by men who charged by the hour, but his public mask had cracked in the one place he depended upon it, among lenders, customers, and officials who had trusted him to make dangerous manufacture respectable. Within a week, 2 institutional buyers suspended Calder contracts. The inspectorate prosecuted the unsafe removal, and the magistrates imposed a fine substantial enough to prevent its being dismissed as a clerical expense. Civil claims from the former workers would take longer. The White Cross decision was more complicated. The building remained hazardous. Mabel's ownership did not become sound merely because Crewe had behaved badly. Copley condemned the West Range and chimney to controlled dismantling, required the dipping room to remain sealed until specialists could remove residue, and allowed the front offices and East Laboratory to stand only if shored before winter. 21 days was never enough to save all of it, Mabel told the workers gathered in the yard. We can preserve the record, and one useful wing. I will not promise the rest. No one cheered that either. Caleb opened his estimate, Dinah opened the contribution book, and they began deciding what could be afforded. The bank recognized a reconstituted White Cross Workers' Benefit Club after comparing the wall census, signed testimonies, and deposit patterns. It appointed 3 interim trustees, Dinah, Agnes, and a retired schoolmistress chosen by the contributors. The £286 belonged to the sick workers and dependents, not to repairing Mabel's property. Their first payments went to medical care, food, and the families of women who had died. That separation mattered to Mabel. Crewe's newspapers had already called the fund a treasure found in her factory. She published a notice through Mr. Marr stating that she claimed no penny of it. The statement cost her the easy ending the town expected and earned something more durable. Former Calder workers began bringing small pieces of evidence, copied shift cards, labels, and one bundle of Mabel's trial notes a packer had rescued from a waste bin after her dismissal. The patent office did not award her victory by sentiment. Examiners compared the recovered notes, provisional specification, supplier records, trial samples, and Crewe's filings. After 4 months, Crewe withdrew the contested claims rather than submit to further examination. Under a settlement recorded by Mr. Marr, he acknowledged Mabel's authorship, paid her costs and damages for the stolen work, and surrendered the copied application. He admitted no broader cruelty. Mabel required no false repentance. Her corrected process was accepted the following spring in her own name. It was an improvement upon existing safety matches, not the invention of them, a more reliable treated striking surface for damp northern shops, paired with enclosed mixing and continuous extraction. That modest truth was strong enough. She licensed it only to manufacturers who accepted inspection, ventilation standards, covered mixing vessels, washing facilities, and medical reporting that named the women as workers rather than counting their trays. The first license payment financed White Cross. Restoration began with subtraction. Under Copley's plan, trained crews dampened and lifted contaminated deposits into sealed containers. The leaning chimney came down brick by numbered brick. The west roof was removed before snow could bring it into the yard. Nothing usable rose overnight. Through December, the front wing consisted of shores, tarpaulins, and one office whose stove still smoked when the wind turned east. Mabel rented a cleaner room in town for experiments. She walked to Whitecross each morning to inspect the work and returned after dark to record costs. She paid Caleb as supervising mechanic instead of asking friendship to replace wages. Dinah, recovered from the dust exposure, attended every safety meeting and stopped work twice when contractors ignored the agreed dampening procedure. Both times Mabel backed her, though the delay consumed money. Some townspeople never revised their judgment. A grocer who had refused credit now offered it extravagantly, and Mabel paid cash instead. The sanitary chairman resigned, but continued to tell anyone who listened that Whitecross should have been flattened. Others changed for reasons Mabel could respect. Dr. Fenner helped establish a weekly clinic after admitting publicly that he had accepted company descriptions of women's illness too readily. Copley arranged for the preserved wall fragments to be mounted behind glass with ventilation, not scrubbed clean for visitors. The photographer who had accompanied crew donated a plate showing the broken drain cap and testified to the fresh hammer marks. By May, the East Range had a sound slate roof, tall windows that opened by mechanical linkage, and a testing room with washable surfaces. The old duct remained visible along one wall, its failed belt wheel beside Caleb's improved enclosed fan. They called the enterprise Whitecross Safety Laboratory. It tested matches and other small factory processes for firms willing to publish conditions. A cooperative packing room employed 12 women at named weekly wages, with no fines disguised as deductions. Polly became the first apprentice clerk. She learned double entry accounts from the retired schoolmistress and simple reagent testing from Mabel. Her earliest contribution was a board listing every hazardous substance brought onto the premises and where it was stored. She wrote clearly enough that no worker needed permission to read it. The Benefit Club rented 2 upstairs rooms in the restored front range. One served as its office, the other as the clinic. Its payments were made before witnesses and entered in books open to every member. The old wall census, reconstructed from fragments, samples, copies and memory, grew to 316 names. Blank spaces remained where evidence was uncertain. Mabel refused to fill them with guesses. Lavinia's role emerged slowly. Letters found at the infirmary showed that she had persuaded the women to build a record management could neither read nor easily destroy. She had chosen reactive wall markings because whitewashing, intended to make the factory appear clean, would preserve each older layer. The fired tiles supplied stable comparisons. Her acquisition of Whitecross had been part of the liquidation agreement after she threatened to disclose the concealed benefit deductions. She had gained the building, but not the bank's membership proof. Illness prevented her from completing the work, so she left the property to the one person she believed could unite chemistry with testimony. In her last letter, Lavinia had not called Mabel brilliant or promised wealth. She had written, "You know that a result without the names of those who bore its cost is only half a result." Mabel placed that sentence in the club's minute book, not upon a grand plaque. On the first anniversary of the hearing, a fine November mist settled over Whitecross. Moisture silvered the repaired bricks and deepened the surviving lime panel behind its protective glass. As the room cooled, the faint rows of names became visible, not all at once, but layer by layer. Dinah stood beside them, explaining the symbols to a group of young packers. She did not point first to her scar. She pointed to the triangles and described how a penny from each woman had become care none of them had been allowed to claim. Across the room, Mabel inspected the new fan gauge while Polly entered the reading in an open book. The sound of machinery was quieter now, shaped by guards, ducts and limits. No foreman could remove a belt without the change appearing in 3 separate records. Caleb had left one section of new plaster untouched near the entrance. Its whiteness once made Mabel uneasy. At Whitecross, a white wall had been used to hide harm, and through Lavinia's cunning, to preserve its evidence. Now a shallow table stood before the blank surface with a jar of ordinary graphite pencils. Each person employed in the restored works wrote a name there, openly, followed by a date and a trade. No chemical wash was needed. No later coat would bury them. Mabel waited until the others had finished. Then she added her own name beneath the women whose labor had made hers possible, not as owner, nor assistant, nor failed chemist, but simply as Mabel Hartley, analyst. The mist brightened the old census behind glass, while the new names remained plain in the morning light.